Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you holding this hearing. I would think that that Enforcement Division actually, its location in the greater Washington area is still a pretty good place for it to be located. But we've got a lot of witnesses. I'm anxious to hear their testimony, and I hope we have lots of time for questions because I've got lots of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Merkley. Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to continue this line because Senator Bennett raised it. It's exactly where I was headed too. This risk assessment, you got protocols. You've got to have some kind of checklist you go down, and while it may not be appropriate to micromanage down to this level, I think you hear the committee's enormous concern and frustration with how this enormous fraud went undetected for so long. So I would ask, perhaps, Mr. Chairman, if we could get this list of their protocols and their checklists submitted to the committee at some point, so we could at least take a look at it. And clearly, as the chairman said, one of my questions was going to be, do you think that risk assessment works, your current process? My sense is it clearly didn't in this case, and you made in some, Ms. Richards, in some of your earlier comments, you raised the question of for example, independent custodian, looking forward at studying that. You looked the question about whether we should have certified auditors. But in this Madoff case, wouldn't the fact that there was not an independent custodian, the fact that there wasn't a certified auditor, have, on your current risk assessment process, bump this up higher so that it would have gotten a little deeper looking?
That's an excellent question, and we are certainly going back and looking at this particular firm and at our risk assessment methodologies. I can't talk about this particular firm. I can say, however, that the risk assessment methodology—
You can't tell us whether, if you've got two red flags of a non-independent custodian and a non-certified accountant, in any firm's case would be enough indication that this is something we need to dig into.
I'd be happy to share with you the factors that we look at in Form ADV. Whether the firm uses an affiliated custodian is one of the items. The identity of the accountant is not, and so that clearly is an item that I believe. And
what about on the? Let's go to a couple other areas. What about the fee structure? I mean, Mr. Madoff, as his investment advisory, and I've been involved in this field for some time. You know, it's rare to see an investment advisor who isn't going to charge a management fee and take a little percentage of the ups. Mr. Madoff represented that he was simply doing this, going to gain all his fees simply on execution of the trades. Isn't that in and of itself another red flag that should have been said, hey, is this guy doing this all out of the good-heartedness of his?
I can't speak about the particular Madoff filing. How the
is the fee structure one of those factors?
Is a risk factor.
Is the fee structures
yes, Senator.
One of those factors?
Yes, Senator.
All right. What about the question of the actual performance of the fund? I mean, one of the things that is so stunning and perhaps should have been a red flag actually to investors as well, in terms of a buyer beware, the fact that Mr. Madoff through up and down times has such absolutely consistent returns has to be an extraordinary outlier if you do any type of review of performance. Is performance of funds one of the criteria you look at?
Many academics have said that presenting consistent returns over a period of time is indicative of something. And we certainly have read that academic literature. At the current time, hedge funds and investment advisors are not required to file with the SEC their performance returns, so we don't have access to that data. We have recently relied on self-reported hedge fund performance returns to a private database. So again, that data is not verified. We have no idea whether it's accurate or not, but we've used those private data sources in order to supplement our risk assessment and identify registered hedge fund advisors for examination. But we agree that performance returns can be very useful in identifying aberrations.
So currently, the risk assessment process does look at the independent status of the custodian or not.
Yes.
Does not look at whether the auditor is registered or certified or not. Is that correct?
Investment advisors are not required to submit the name of their
does
auditor.
Look at the fee structure.
Yes.
But does not look at performance.
Yes, that's correct.
So 2 out of the 4, if we'd perhaps had all 4 of those as criteria, might that have led to a more thorough analysis, not just in this firm, but in other firms?
I so strongly believe that the risk assessment methodology has to be improved with better access, not just to this data, but I believe there are other types of data points too that would help us do better risk assessment. I do want to say, however, that we don't believe that firms not identified as high risk for our purposes present no risk. Every investment advisor can be engaged in fraud. So risk assessment is a first start. It helps us to prioritize our examination resources. But one of the fundamental questions, I think, is whether all investment advisors should be subject to some routine level, some minimum level of examination oversight. Because risk assessment gives you a way to prioritize risk, but it doesn't tell you the situations where there is risk that you've not identified. So it can help us, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
One of the questions, and I know that Senator Shelby and Senator Schumer have talked about additional resources, and I saw your numbers 425 in terms of investment advisors, and I believe 300 and some in terms of broker-dealers. Clearly, there may be need for additional personnel, but in addition to additional personnel, obviously the complexity of the markets has exponentially increased over the last decade. As you look about additional resources, I would hope that continuing education and ongoing upgrading of the skills of your workforce and sharing the chairman's earlier comments. I know, this is a dedicated agency with folks who really want to try to get the job done, but making sure that you stay abreast of what's going on in the markets and what are these new tools that as Wall Street continues to create new tools. Is that part of your request, or would that be part of your
Yes, Senator, I agree completely with everything that you've said. When the agency received additional funding to pay examiners and other SEC staff at pay parity levels with other regulators, it really, thank you to this committee for that, it really allowed us to hire and retain higher qualified people, and we need to continue to do that. In the examination program in particular, I really want us to hire quants, economists, and people who can analyze complex trading strategies and really help examiners really identify emerging risks.
And then to keep them current even after they've been hired, correct?
Yes, and I would like us to improve our training programs. We have, I think, very good training programs, but I believe that we can work hard to improve them to make sure that people are maintaining education and expertise. Thank
you. Mr. Luparello, I've got a question on FINRA. I believe you mentioned this earlier, but I just want to make sure I understand. Let's assume we've got the FINRA folks in looking at a broker-dealer. They're trying to get documents. They're trying to go forward. And it's my understanding under the current situation that if the head of that broker-dealer said, hold it, you can't go to those documents because those are my investment advisory documents, you immediately stop.
Well, it gets complicated in a situation like the Madoff situation when it was a single legal entity. That usually comes up more in the context where the other business lines are in separate affiliates and we clearly get stopped. Our ability to compel documents may take us a little bit of the way, but it will never allow us to go fully and investigate the parts of that single legal entity that are not broker-dealer that are not the broker-dealer parts of the entity. So in the advisory context, it gets complex because of the convergence between advisory business and brokerage business, which starts to look more and more.
But are you saying? Because I hope you're not saying that if you had somebody in looking at a broker-dealer, and they thought they were onto something, and they thought something smelled bad, and all of a sudden the CEO of the firm said, "Hold it, you can't go there because that's in our investment advisory part of our business." That even if you were legally precluded from going on, that you wouldn't come back and either relay that information to the SEC or someone. Is that, tell me that's not the case.
You're absolutely correct. We will take.
So in this case, in the case of Madoff, when my understanding was when he became an investment advisor, didn't he use the investment advisor reasoning as one way to preclude FINRA from looking further?
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, Senator. He fundamentally misrepresented the business to us. All of our examinations, including after 2006, the Form BD he filed after 2006, continue to represent no advisory business in the broker-dealer.
And there was no, from your investigators, there was no skepticism about, there was no red flag. They accepted that at face value.
There were no red flags presented to us, and there were no indicia of any sort of customer activity in the books and records of the broker.
But in the normal course, if there was that kind of bright line wall precluding you from investigating further because of the investment advisory component, that investigator might come back and say, hey, we need to turn this over to the SEC because this.
Absolutely. We often, in our examinations, investigations of broker-dealers, take our jurisdiction as far as it can go, and then once we hit that jurisdictional dead end, refer that conduct over to the SEC. We do that hundreds of times a year in fraud cases and insider trading cases and other types of cases. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Very good questioning. Senator Corcoran.